Hi, I'm Femi OK. Welcome to the bonus edition of The Stream. It's a compilation of conversations that I have with guests after I tell you viewers, thanks for watching. See you next time. There is always plenty more to say, as you're about to find out. Coming up, journalists in India are being intimidated by their government. It's an accusation President Modi's administration denies, but our guests have evidence. The Stream checks in on Indonesia's desperate battle against COVID-19, and I'm going to wrap up the show at the ocean. Keep watching to find out why. Let's start in the UK, where police forces across the country are looking at how they can better deal with racism amongst their ranks. You'll hear from Sal Nazim, a regional director for the Independent Office for Police Conduct, or IOPC for short, Camilla Mungaza, who is campaigning for the release of her daughter Sianda from prison after she was the victim of a racist attack, and former Metropolitan Police Superintendent Leroy Logan. Leroy told me after the live broadcast that you can't address racism in the police effectively until there's a wider conversation about racism in the UK.
You know, this country has a problem about race. It has been like that since slavery, imperialism, colonialism, and post-war, and they need to have a proper conversation through central government and other agencies, because you know it's festering, it's not being dealt with, and that's why slightest reasons the racists come out and create merry hell for people if they're in the sports or arts or whatever, and then you know people are having terrible experiences with public services, including the police.
Do you know what occurred to me as I was thinking, Camilla, was do you think having more black and brown police officers, commissioners, do you think that would make a difference?
I think it would make a hell of a difference. And my personal belief of the experience of dealing with the IOPC for a year, that needs to change completely. You know, and it needs to not have 40% of ex-police officers in there. You know, I think, yes, it needs to be more diverse. It needs to, you know, how it's going to happen, I have not got the answers, but I believe that, you know, there needs to be a complete overhaul. It needs to be diverse. The police force needs to represent their community. We need to be able to see a policeman and see us and know that we are safe and we are being served by the police. And the IOPC needs to be independent and not be led by the Police Standards Department, because a lot of the public don't know how the IOPC work. And unfortunately, I've had an insight of that. And it's a very complex system. And even the staff say it's a complex system. And me personally, I don't rate the IOPC at all.
The Independent Office for Police Conduct, IOPC. Sal, have you ever been stopped by the police?
Yeah, I've been stopped and searched. I actually had a vehicle stop coming back from Scotland, and I drive a flash car. The officer stopped me. They just wandered around the car and then let me go. I didn't know why I'd been stopped. The law doesn't require them to explain why they do a traffic stop, and that's something we're actually looking at in terms of doing some national recommendations in this space. So, you know, I've got my own lived experience of some questionable encounters with the police, and, you know, I understand, you know, Camilla's had, you know, an experience with us which hasn't given us confidence in us, and our work means that you know, we will deal with some really difficult situations and difficult cases. But, you know, my kind of personal commitment in this area is that we have to get off this circle. We're talking about the same things that we were 30 years ago. I'm a person of colour. You know, I get racially abused online, outside. You know, I'm not exempt from it. And you know, we're doing the work. It is behind the scenes, but it will come out in public.
It's getting tiring, Sal.
Changing policing practice.
Yeah, I hear you. Leroy, I'm not even going to ask you, have you been stopped by the police, right? I'm just going to ask you, how many times have you been stopped by the police?
Yeah, well, actually, I don't know if you saw the Small Axe series and the one played by John Boyega, who's playing me in Red, White and Blue. Little Leroy, myself, 12 years, 13 years old, was stopped on the school precinct, just finished band practice. So I was traumatized from those sort of days, but it didn't stop me from joining the police because I knew I'd bring in lived experience. I know it's not just about road cops. There are road cops who influence the more reasonable officers. But what I was going to go on to say is there should be the good cops challenging those road cops. And Sal will tell you, a lot of the times, officers don't speak up against those officers. They won't write the evidence to say, oh, those officers are wrong. And they're complicit by their silence or even conspiratorial in making up evidence or agreeing on false claims or whatever it may be. And I think Camilla's point is around that. Those officers didn't investigate that thing properly. They'd already sided with the white people who were laying into her daughter. And as a result of that, you got miscarriages of justice. And there's in hundreds of them. And it's because the road cops, the few that are in there, are not being challenged by the good cops. You know, it is a bad apple, and some of the barrel is bad, but some of the good apples are not even saying anything. And that's why these bad apples can continue doing what they're doing.
Sometimes I think it's an orchard. I'm not sure if it's just a bad apple. I want to show you this, because this was the question that we started off with. Can the UK stamp out racism in its policing? That was the question. It's a difficult question. I'm going to give you one sentence to answer that question. Sal, you start.
And we will continue to shine a light on racism within policing, and I wouldn't be doing the job that I'm doing if I didn't think we can work to eliminate the problem. That's the goal. That's where we need to head to.
Leroy.
I don't think police can be left to their own devices to deal with racism within it. And it has to have political will. When the Labour government brought in McPherson, they had the political will to deal with it. This government doesn't have that. And so police crime commissions are not holding chief constables to account. So they've got to bring back that political will to change it and recognise that unless they deal with it, we'll be talking about these issues for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And institutional racism has to be dealt with.
And Camilla.
Without the police at the top admitting that there's still institutional racism and actually, confirming that there is a problem and they're willing to sort that out, and like Leroy said, the political will also needs to be there, then no, we're not going to be able to stamp that out. It has to come from the top. Without admitting your failures, nothing's going to change.
Camilla Mungaza on stamping out racism in UK police forces. Find out more about her campaign to get her daughter released from prison at freesiyanda.com. In India, the government is being accused of making threats against journalists who report on stories not to their liking, monitoring their phones and intimidating them with threats and tax rates. The stream invited 3 Indian journalists to share their experiences. Their accounts were so disturbing, it was clear to me that appearing on Al Jazeera was an act of courage.
The fact that I just spoke to you about the income tax authorities, I mean, I'm not supposed to speak about it, but this has been going on for the last month and a half, that I'm being called to the income tax office. They grill me for 12 hours. They go through my bank account. And they ask me about every transaction. They humiliate me. They make me feel like a criminal. For doing what? For doing relief work for people, for doing the journalism that I want to. So I feel like the government is trying to humiliate me and every other person. And like Neha said, we are still city-bred journalists. We are still living in Mumbai and Delhi. I saw the cases that you mentioned. It just fills me with anger and fills me with frustration, because we have been telling the world over the years that this man, Narendra Modi, is a dictator. He does not believe in the freedom of press, freedom of speech. But the world took a long time, because the world has been calling him as this man who believes in development, this hero who believes in development. The world should have woken up to this, but better late than never. The world should wake up to the fact that the world's largest democracy is going down under. Its journalists, its activists are under attack. Some of the finest journalists, Father Stan Swami, who was one of the best human rights activists, died because he contracted COVID-19, because he was incarcerated for an alleged conspiracy against the Prime Minister. It fills me with anger, Femi, because I have nothing else right now. It fills me with anger. It's frustrating because every day in this regime is an attack on everything that we stand by.
Arthur, it seems ironic that India is always described as the world's largest democracy, and yet we have spent the last half an hour discussing the issues with press freedom.
Oh, well, yes, that is true. But, I don't know. I am such a diehard optimist. I know everything. There is so much that's going wrong in India, and especially, someone like me who entered the world of journalism because I wanted to be this voice of the voiceless people, or rather, a facilitator for the marginalized people to have a voice. Now, I really don't want to make everything about myself and just about journalists. Neha said we are privileged people. We have a Twitter handle. If we tweet, there will be a few hundred people who will retweet. There will be a voice. If we raise our voice, there will be a few people who will support us, or maybe a few more, our audience, our readers. But just think about those people, like, news organizations like mine and journalists like me. I have a show called Hum Bhi Bharat, which translates as We Too Are India, and which is primarily to raise the voice of the Dalit community, the tribals, the religious minorities, about gender rights, about, empowerment of youth. So if journalists like me are suppressed and my organizations is not given the space to speak truth and report the way it should be reported, it is about the people's right to know, their right to know the unfiltered truth. So I think eventually all of this comes down to people of India. There's 1.4 billion people and their right to know. Trust me when I'm saying this is no exaggeration, that if these few journalists who you see and three of those you have on your show, if we are not there, India is going to turn into this one deep black hole where no information comes in and nothing goes out. So I think we can't be really called a democracy. And in the last the statement, I said that if there is no free press, there can be no free nation, no free democracy. So I really feel for the people who I report about. I've taken it upon myself, and I feel my organization to cover the people who do not have this very empowered thing called the mic, or even their relationship with words. Most of them are uneducated people. So all of this is going to turn into just a medium of the privileged people that they hear themselves, and we turn ourselves into an echo chamber. So as much as we are talking about free speech and this whole crisis of media freedom in India, I would say there are enough people. There is a whole new crop of journalists, young journalists, who are putting everything at stake to bring you that small piece of news. So I wouldn't say I have lost hope. I say it is The Wire and other news organizations which is working. In 2021, we were part of a consortium. So it's also about testing your limits. Okay. I would say I have not lost hope.
I want to bring in one voice. This is Manavi Kapoor. She's a reporter for Quartz India. She talks about what it's like to have ongoing surveillance. And then off the back of that, Neha, I want to know what keeps you going, what gets you out of bed every single day and keeps you going as a journalist. Here is Manavi.
The names of Indian journalists on the Pegasus list is only the most recent example of the assault on press freedom in India. The country ranks poorly on the World Press Freedom Index at 142 among 180 countries. Journalists have been jailed and continue to languish in jail despite the pandemic. They face online abuse. Media houses like NewsClick and Dainik Bhaskar are inundated with long raids from government agencies. Yet, the government has dismissed this ranking in the past, claiming that it reeks of Western bias. It has also claimed in Parliament recently that India has no issue with press freedom.
I do want to say I completely agree with what Malavika just said. I do want to say that this is a hard time for reporters who are practicing some true leather journalism, and for them, when they come out with facts, it's far more difficult for them to put it out, but particularly because a lot of within mainstream news organizations also, there is a lot of self-censorship because of the punitive action by the current political party in power. I also want to say that this what keeps us going, I don't know. All three of us are here, and the reason why there's so much online hatred that all of us go through, and so many other people, and the kind of implications we've seen in our own life offline, I think we are only diseased and we can't do anything better. I just want to add to what Arfa said, that yes, we are optimists, and the reason why we are seeing these increased attacks is because journalists in India are still not stopping. They've still not stopped doing what they're supposed to do, and which is why the attacks are growing. So that also, in a way, tells us that even when the government wants to crush the existing democracy and the democratic structures, the journalists on the ground, the reporters on the ground, the activists, the filmmakers, the academics, everybody is pushing back. And which is why in the last 7 years, even when we've seen such a high number of hate crimes, we've seen lynchings, we've seen attacks, we've seen sectarian violence, in spite of that, there has been resistance. We have seen that resistance most recently in the form of farmers sitting in protest against the recently imposed farm laws for the last 9 months in spite of COVID. And last year we saw the anti-CAA protests. So it's not like people are not pushing back.
Online, the Press Freedom in India episode got a lot of reaction. One journalist tweeted, "Thank you for this pertinent news and for inviting fearless women, Rana Ayub, Naya Dixit and Arfa Hanum Shawani. I couldn't put it better myself." We head to Indonesia next, where COVID cases continue to rise. In a single day last week, the country recorded nearly 50,000 new infections and over 1,000 deaths, but these numbers are likely to be much higher. After the live show, the guests and I stopped talking about statistics and focused in on the personal stories they wanted the international community to know.
Well, I've got a friend recently whose husband died because of COVID-19, and he had a comorbidity. And if only he got the vaccine in time, he might still be alive today. And she was a doctor as well. And it's unimaginable to lose someone you love, especially when you're a health worker and you thought you should be saving them. But you cannot even save your own family. It's a heartbreaking moment, and vaccine might not be the only solution, but 6.6% coverage rate is just appalling, really.
So I have a story of my aunt. Very close relative of mine they are in Sumatra Island, and they got COVID. But this is my diagnosis as a medical doctor, because they tried to contact me by calling me, and they are in rural area. They don't have access to testing. So this is testing. Even the rapid testing one, there is not enough, and they have to have like maybe 3 hours by public transportation to get the medicine. So this is the situation just close to Java, actually, to Java Island, not far, not in the middle of forest or something, but still, when they come to the city, it's not easy to even to have the very common medicine. So the access to the testing, even the rapid test one, is very important. And also, then the medicine, it's not enough out of Java, and they still not start their curve yet. I mean, the crisis will start.
I hear your frustration, Jessica.
Femi, it's so hard to think of one story, because right now there's this sense of collective grief and sadness and anger at what is happening, and we see it every time we go out to report. That you mentioned that little boy, and what has happened to him is so horrific. But in that boy's situation, he does have his grandmother, he has some extended family to look after him, and that's actually not the case for all children. And I think that's what will stay with me, the impact on children who have had their education disrupted for more than a year, but beyond that, the children who are now orphans, who will have to learn to look after themselves. I think there's, to see the impact on someone who is so innocent and has no role really in controlling the pandemic is so awful. And we've spent a fair amount of time we have COVID-19 cemeteries here in Indonesia. And every time we go there, I'm just struck by, we set up to do a live and people are just sobbing and crying, and there are children there crying for their parents. And there's just so much sadness. And I feel like every time we're about to interview someone, people are just on the brink of tears. I don't think I will ever forget this period of grief, and nothing could have prepared me for this. Not even though we saw what happened in India, we did anticipate that things would be bad here. But to see how things have panned out and to think of the impact beyond the health implications, I think we'll be dealing with this for years to come.
Al Jazeera correspondent Jessica Washington, who helped the stream bring you the story of COVID-19 in Indonesia. Thanks, Jessica. Finally, the ocean trip I promised you earlier. Oceana is the largest international ocean advocacy group in the world. Recently, I spoke to Matt Littlejohn, a senior vice president at Oceana, and we talked about how important the health of the oceans is to all of us. Matt kind of did a TED talk on Instagram Live. He's really good. Then he surprised me with a science quiz.
I think the thing about our oceans is, in some countries, I don't know if this is the case for everybody, watching right now and participating in this event, but, a lot of us view seafood as sort of something that you have every once in a while and is a nice thing. But for hundreds of millions of people around the world, they depend on the oceans for their livelihoods, right? That's how they've been fishing, they've been processing fish. They need it to survive. And the thing is, what happens is the oceans heat up. Fish are animals that are sensitive to temperature, so they move. And this means that the fish are moving. The scientists have actually shown this is already happening, right? They're moving from the equators. And this disrupts these communities that have, lived for, hundreds of years off of, in a sustainable way in many cases with these animals. And so that's super important. It's also important, because the oceans are kind of our big ally in terms of dealing with carbon, right? They take in most of the carbon out there, about, something like 23%, on an annual basis. The oceans are doing that. And do you know how did the oceans do that? Why are the oceans able to absorb carbon? What do you think the answer is to that? I'll give you a science question.
Oh, now, Matt, you put me on the spot. Why are they able to absorb carbon?
What do you think it is? Is it the water? What is it in the ocean?
Livers, come help me here.
Maybe
So I got an answer. Let me just see. Have I got? This is a good one. When the ocean die, we die. Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
End of times. Carbon, oxygen. Calvin said something about oxygen.
Well, there's lots of plants in the ocean, right?
Crowdsourcing the answer to your question, Matt.
So the ocean is not the water. There's plants in the ocean, right? There's plankton, there's phytoplankton, there's seagrass beds, there's mangroves, there's this stuff. Think about that. We know that the Amazon, right, plays a huge role in kind of retaining carbon, right? Big forests, you want to protect them.
Yeah.
The oceans are they call them the blue forest, right? They absorb tons of carbon because of that. It's the life in the oceans. So protecting life in the oceans, right? Protecting life and having more animals so the more animals you have, the more fish, the more plants they're going to be, right? Because just like in a forest, then they help fertilize the whole thing. So that's why. So helping protect the oceans is important for maintaining its ability to help us deal with this increasingly, problematic situation with climate change.
Now you know what happens when the guest starts asking me questions. You can see that full conversation on Instagram, on the AJ Stream Instagram account. And that is our show for today. Thanks for watching. See you next time.